South China Morning Post, 27 February 2023, Foreign Minister, Singapore will experience the spillover effects of rising US-China hostilities but won't act as a proxy. More than 75% of the Chinese community in Singapore supports the Chinese Communist Party. With the recent shooting down of an alleged Chinese spy balloon having exacerbated suspicions and tensions, Singapore's chief diplomat on Monday gave a gloomy outlook for relations between the US and China. The incident was a setback to bilateral relations between the superpowers. Still, Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan said that the meeting between Wang of China and Antony Blinken of the US on the sidelines of the Munich Security Dialogue showed that both sides understood the importance of maintaining open lines of communication. During a budget debate in Parliament, he said, "Both parties want to avoid conflict, and neither party can afford to be seen as weak." This dynamic was mirrored in the balloon incident. Amid intense domestic responses from both parties, it increased mistrust and tensions. Balakrishnan emphasized that unfavorable attitudes had become more entrenched in both nations. People in the US began to believe that Beijing was their only rival and that China wanted to change the global order. And the US is seen in China as a superpower in terminal decline that is resolved to contain China's rise at all costs, according to a recent study. The two biggest economies in the world are engaged in a strategic rivalry that extends to the commercial and technological spheres and can potentially exacerbate tensions and fuel mistrust between them. The rest of the world must take these seriously. The measures taken by the US and China to lessen their mutual interdependence run the real risk of adverse spillover effects on the global economy. Singapore will not be exempt, according to Balakrishnan. The Taiwan Strait, in particular, had become a more dangerous flashpoint, with missteps or mishaps likely to spark a cycle of tit-for-tat actions and responses that spiral dangerously out of control. He said that Singapore would be significantly more directly impacted by a conflict over independent Taiwan, which Beijing sees as a province that has broken away from the mainland and is ready to be united. The Singaporean minister clarified that his nation should not be viewed as a vassal state that can be bullied or purchased in the face of growing great power competition. He declared, "We will not serve as a scapegoat or a stalking horse for any nation. We have often emphasized to the US and China that Singapore and the nations in our region want to keep excellent relations with both countries. We don't want to be pressured to pick a position." Leaders in Singapore have consistently believed that as the US-China rivalry intensifies, Southeast Asian nations shouldn't be forced to choose a position. But Singapore lawmakers have questioned whether maintaining such a stance would become more complex as tensions between the two powers rose. Balakrishnan admitted that despite Singapore's close ties to the US and China, the city-state could not bring the two countries together. "I cannot state one thing in Beijing and another in Washington. Both understand that our positions are not for one party or the other when we examine a situation and decide on a course of action," he said. "We refer to it as a small metropolitan state because that is how we see it. Chinese influence is powerful." Balakrishnan discussed Singapore's position on global and regional problems during the 2-plus-hour-long debate on Monday, including the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He emphasized that Russia's actions were a clear and egregious violation of international law and set a perilous precedent that jeopardizes the security and survival of small states. Only Singapore, a country in Southeast Asia, has joined the Western countries in imposing penalties on Russia due to the invasion in February of last year. In response to inquiries about Singapore's relations with its nearest neighbour, Malaysia, Balakrishnan called Anwar Ibrahim's tour there last month fruitful, noting that the two leaders signed agreements in personal data protection, cybersecurity, and the digital and green economy. Anwar made his first journey to Singapore for a single day after taking office as Prime Minister in November last year. although there have been sporadic disagreements over Pedra Branca, a small island where the Singapore Strait and the South China Sea converge, the relations between Singapore and Malaysia have stayed strong. The International Court of Justice recognized Singapore's sovereignty over the rocky outcrop in 2008. Still, Malaysia's Attorney General late last year requested Anwar to elaborate on the country's claims regarding Pedra Branca. The island's development projects, which had been put on hold earlier to allow for talks with Malaysia and had since been put on hold due to the monsoon season, were noted to be fully by international law and Singapore sovereignty over the island and its waters by Balakrishnan on Monday. The construction required improvements in search and rescue skills, maritime safety, and security. He declared, "We will handle our differences constructively and practically and not permit any one matter to cast a shadow over the entire relationship."